All right, so as folks continue to log on, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia, a bookseller with Politics and Prose. We're live with Michael Farquhar discussing More Bad Days in History, the delightfully dismal day-by-day saga of ignominy, idiocy, and incompetence continues. You can follow the link posted in the chat to purchase the book directly from us at Politics and Prose. If you have a question this evening, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. This hour will really respond to the audience questions, so your engagement and participation is very much encouraged. And we will try to get to everyone's questions during the discussion, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time. Additionally, we're glad to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. To enable captions, click the CC Live Transcript icon at the bottom of your screen. And before we jump in, we do want to sincerely thank all of you out there for joining us. We are really grateful to our family of loyal customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. It is my pleasure to introduce this hysterical book. In these gleefully gloomy pages, you'll find a politically smeared George Washington, a cranky Colonel Sanders, a homicidal Saint Olga of Kiev, a cuckolded Napoleon, a flame-censored Steinbeck, a treacherous Douglas MacArthur, a weeping Einstein, an exasperated Charles Dickens, a humiliated King Henry II, and a faux-contrite Ted Kennedy. And that's just in July. From the decadent palaces of ancient Rome to the modern halls of Congress, this illuminating, sometimes disturbing narrative features an almost endless array of misbehavior, amusing mishaps, and breathtaking misfortune over the ages and across the historical spectrum. Each less than red letter day of the year is recounted in Farquhar's wry voice and comes with the enduring lesson the Wall Street Journal found in the first volume of this series. More bad days in history may offer consolation to the great mass of quotidian bellyachers, whose piddling misfortunes and regrets will snap neatly into perspective when set against this record of idiocy and disaster. Michael Farquhar, a former writer and editor at The Washington Post, is the best-selling author of numerous books, including the critically acclaimed Behind the Palace Doors and Secret Lives of the Czars, as well as the popular Penguin Treasury series, A Treasury of Royal Scandals, A Treasury of Great American Scandals, and A Treasury of Foolishly Forgotten Americans. He lives in Washington, D.C. On behalf of Politics and Prose, please join me in welcoming Michael Farquhar. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Julia, for such a nice introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for being here. I hope your day has been great. I'd like to say that health guru Jerome Rodale thought he was having a wonderful day back on June 8th in 1971. And he said, I never felt better in my life, crowing about his vigor. He was the publisher of magazines such as Prevention and Organic Living, Organic Gardening. And this was during a taping of the Decadent show, where he declares, I've decided to live to be 100. Then, with the cameras rolling, Rodale dropped dead of a heart attack. An episode of karmic comeuppance that never aired. That was your bad day in history on June 8th, this day. Plenty more of those throughout this series. One bad day for every day of the year. The ones that you mentioned having bad days in July, Julia, are joined by endless array, as you mentioned. A lovelorn Lincoln, a bitchy Lucille Ball, a weeping Einstein, all sorts of historical figures just not happy on any particular day. It goes chronologically by date, but by day, but back and forth through history. So it could be January 1st, 1901, January 2nd, 1833, and so forth until the end of the year. So it was an incredibly fun book to research and write. And I think what I'd like to do is share one of my favorite bad days.
Oh, please.
All right. Thanks for listening. This one is from November 14th, 1957. A very bad day for a gang of good fellas. The headline, the Mafia Summit, they should have refused. The gang was all there. Don Carlo Gambino, Sam Giancana, Joe Bananas Banano, Big Paul Castellano, Santo Traficante Jr., Joe Profaci, the so-called olive oil king, not to mention close to 100 other mafia bosses, underbosses, enforcers, soldiers, and consiglieri. Decked out in fedoras and camel hair coats, the, he dies. He dies in. I'm sorry. Let me start that again. He dies in with jewels and gold watches. Monsters from across the country descended on the rural upstate New York home. Please pardon my voice. It's an allergy or something worse. Who knows? But when I read, it becomes scratchy. So I beg your indulgence on that. They had descended on the upstate New York home of Joe the Barber Barbera in Appalachia, participated in a major crime confab, perhaps the largest ever. The aroma of barbecued meat wafted over small group discussions of murder techniques. Trouble lurked nearby. State Police Sergeant Edgar Croswell and his partner, Trooper Vince Francisco, thought the influx of luxury cars with out-of-state plates suspicious. They called in reinforcements. Alerted to the police presence, the mafiosi scattered into the surrounding woods and fields like so many silk-clad cockroaches. They poured out of the doors, windows, everywhere, noted a police officer on the scene. While some eluded capture simply by sitting still, there had been no time to secure search warrants. Dozens of others were snared in the wilds into which they had fled in a panic. Those city boys didn't have a chance, Sergeant Croswell told reporters. Their fancy shoes and their hats and coats snagging on branches, we could grab them easy. One by one, we rounded them up, bedraggled, soaking wet and tired. There are no sidewalks in the woods, he said. For supposedly hardened hoodlums bound by a criminal code of honor, it was a sorry spectacle. Indeed, the egg on their faces exceeded the muck on their shoes. I'll tell you the reaction of all us soldiers when we heard about the raid, gangster turned informant Joseph Valachi told author Peter Maas. If soldiers got arrested in a meet like that, you can imagine what the bosses would have done. There they are, running through the woods like scared rabbits, throwing away money so they won't get caught with a lot of cash. Some of them throwing away guns. So who are they kidding when they say we got to respect them? Yet the Appalachian route had consequences far beyond the unrest in the ranks. The secrecy that had always shrouded mob actions was shattered, and the interest of Department of Justice investigators was piqued. It was horrendous, Joe Bonanno wrote in his ironically titled autobiography, A Man of Honor. All those men caught in the same place, publicity, a public relations coup for law enforcement, a field day for journalists, and a nightmare for FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who long denied the mafia's mere existence. Baloney, he had scrawled across one report detailing mob activities. Communist infiltration was the pugnacious director's obsession, and while his files bulged on suspected Reds, contained little. Murderous thugs ravaging American cities. Now, an incensed Hoover faced a highly organized mess. He recognized Appalachian for what it was, wrote Mafia Summit author Gil Revi. Serious challenge to his reputation as the nation's top law enforcement official. Dozens of top mafia leaders gathered from all over the country, and he and his vaunted bureau of mythic G-men were caught flat-footed. the fact called into question not only the air of omniscience that Hoover took pains to project, but more basically his competency. No one questioned the competence of the state police officer who first smelled a rat, however, unintentionally capturing the significance of what proved to be a turning point in America's battle with organized crime. Sergeant Croswell mortally observed, "This is going to be a bad day for a whole lot of people." Is again from November 1957, one of 366 bad days in history. We did a leap year. Rather than my trying to continue to read excerpts, which I think gets to be a little bit of a drag, what I thought would be more enjoyable for everyone and really for me would be to engage and talk about history and talk about various interests in history and the aspects of it that are covered, and writing and anything else people might want to chat about.
Absolutely. So to our audience out there, if you have your own questions about bad days in history or the writing process, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A box. We'll get to those quickly. I do have one question about the writing process. So since you detailed that we're going through a full year of history, 365 days, it seems clear that the structure is going to start us at the beginning of the year and take us through the end. Can you talk about the decision-making process in jumping back and forth across different time periods and different places? What sort of deliberation went into that? Did you feel like you needed a fair representation across the globe or across different time periods? Were you thinking, oh, I've spent a lot of time over here in the 1600s, I should really jump to something more recent? Can you talk about that deliberation a little bit?
Sure. Yes, the transition day to day can be jarring, but it's not informed so much about balance. I mean, ultimately, we were definitely seeking across the globe and across time feeling. But it's really more like what happened on June 5th or June 8th. If it was an interesting event in 1900, it would be. If the next day was across the world 400 years earlier, that was the most interesting event of that day, then that's the one that would be used. So it wasn't the jarring back and forth wasn't a conscious effort in that sense to be balanced, but more of to make sure the best day for every day of the year, the best bad day for every day of the year was used.
What resources did you go to for that information to find across the globe, across time periods, what would be these fascinating anecdotes from history?
Well, the thing is I've been reading and writing history for 25 years, and you learn that when you're reading a biography of somebody, there's little tidbits right in the biography that the writer saw fit to include, but doesn't get a lot of elaboration because it's so much of a larger picture of a life. So you glom onto that little aside about somebody's peccadillo. You go, wow, that needs more development. So I find myself researching that particular thing that I picked up, and during researching that, you're amazed about how many other things are showing up amidst the research on one thing. So it's a combination of reading biographies, knowing a little bit of general history across the world. I'm much more familiar with Western history than Eastern, but enough Eastern history to know a few really good stories that I've picked up along the way. So it's kind of a wide variety of sources. We've got in Washington, D.C., where I live, we have the Library of Congress right here. And it's a trove. And the internet helps in that you can actually read excerpts from biographies, and you can at least find the book, the professor, or whoever you need to talk to. Find where they are online, and then go from there. A lot easier than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. That really resonates with me, this idea that it's often in the footnote of something, and those secondary characters in history where you see this odd, you're like, wait, what did they just write? And you have to go and find that whole train of thought or that thread through history. One of our listeners, Kathleen Enright, asks, have you ever thought of going in the Hamnet direction of historical fiction, of maybe finding that tidbit and fleshing it out beyond the real?
Is that the famous actress from Guys and Dolls who might be asking you that question?
Kathleen.
Right. That was, well, to write fiction, I didn't understand the first word that begins with an H. What was it, Kathleen?
Historical fiction.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am no good at fiction. I marvel when I read historic fiction about how well a storyteller like Ken Follett or any of the other geniuses in that field can weave history with a compelling story. I wish I could do it. My skill, if I can call it a skill, is telling a good story from the actual history pages, synthesizing in a way that's not dry, that lends itself to a few laughs. But I do not have nearly the imagination or the talent to even venture into that arena.
Mm-hmm. Jill Sanderson asks, how did you select the event for each day in history? And that sort of ties into sort of the idea of what we find funny or sort of odd. Are you using your own sense of humor, or are you trying to think about different people's sense of humor as you're writing for your audience?
I think you have to start for writing for yourself. With an audience in mind, with the idea that if there's something that you find compelling, interesting, or funny, somebody else will too. I would never be able to write anything where I go, I don't really think this is really interesting or funny, but maybe somebody else would. Excuse me. But the first criteria is, am I getting a kick out of this story? Am I enjoying researching it? Is the writing of it fun? Most of all, it's just about having fun reading history. There's nothing. David McCullough, another popular biographer, excuse me, you all have to continue to excuse me. He said there's nothing wrong with writing history people want to read, but it has to sing to you first.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's easier for us to digest history if it's written in more of a personable way of speaking? Do you think that most of us today are looking for that in history, or do you think there are some of us who really would like sort of a straightforward foray into the past?
I think if you're a serious research historian that needs a deep, detailed foray, my books are not for you. My books are accurate history, they're complete history, but they're abbreviated history. I mean, you can't tell more than a couple paragraphs per day or a couple pages per day of a specific event. So the hard work is to synthesize a great story into a couple of pages, make it compelling. And if your reader finds it interesting or is being introduced to an area of history he or she's never read about, then that's awesome. Then you go find the history book with a complete coverage of that event or that person. Mm-hmm. So no, I think that all of us could be more interested in history if we were taught it, that it doesn't have to be dead serious. It's really not about memorizing dates. At the end of the day, it's about people. Sometimes people are just nuts. And when they're performing on a world or national stage, they can be extra nuts. That's the fun of history to me.
Mm. It just struck me when you said that you could absolutely pick this book up and just read one fact per day. If you wanted, you could just read a bad day in history for each day of the year. I don't know. I feel like I would devour it faster, but you could with a book like this. For some of those threads that you were following when you decided which bad day you wanted to include in the book, were there any that required more research or that led you down a rabbit hole that was deeper than you expected?
Oh, that happens all the time because, while you want to make history fun, you also have to make sure that the stories you're telling are 100% accurate and balanced, and that you get that little bit that I was mentioning earlier, and then to elaborate on it and find more information can be extremely difficult. But the fun of it is that you do discover other stories while you're researching. Sometimes the worst thing that happens is when you find a bit of information and then start doing rounds of research and find out at the end which often. I mean, a lot of people and a lot of events are written from a biased perspective from interested parties of the period. So historic figures have been unfairly maligned by enemies of the day, and the enemies are having the final word in the historic record. And that false stories are spread often in early America. I mean, the stories about our founding fathers and the malicious lies spread about them. So when you come across something about Jefferson and you go, oh God, I hope this is true, because this is really interesting. I think this really reflects on the man beyond what we know of him. And it's funny and it's fun. And then when you talk to the Jefferson historian, you find out that there's indeed more to that story, and that there's depth to it, and that it is absolutely accurate. That's the best feeling. I think it further shapes these historic figures. It allows us to know them better, their frailties, and again, it's kind of just eye popping. At all these memorials here in DC, all these guys are enshrined in marble. And we tend to think of them as otherworldly or demigods when they were just guys, smart guys, but guys. And they were petty, a lot of them, jealous of one another, and deep rivals, shooting at each other, literally in duels. The marvel isn't that they were, perfect. The marvel is that despite all these imperfections and pettiness, what they accomplished. So this isn't just to go, here's the joke about Jefferson. No, these stories have a purpose. They're meant to entertain and inform. And I hope that that's really what I've accomplished, is at least to inform enough, as I said earlier, to go do your own further research on Jefferson.
I think that's definitely true, that they're more than humorous. And often there seems to be a great deal of humor in sort of revealing the biases in history and people trying to cover things up, especially in aristocracy or for some of our leaders, people trying to sort of normalize some of their bad days and bad behavior can be quite humorous. Jeff Larkin asked the question, how did the pandemic affect your work on this book?
The pandemic, to be honest with you, was I wasn't writing anymore. I was in the editing process, which is like having a giant COVID virus in your head. Editing is very difficult. It's a lot of people weighing in. It's a lot of people saying what they think it's not just a single editor, it's several people. And I don't think that's funny. Well, I think that's hilarious. I think that needs to come in. I think that needs to go out. So during the last year, that's been the process. It would be nice to be able to say I'm finally able to sit down and do my work in writing, but I didn't. It takes a lot for me to finally sit down and do my work because of ADD. which actually informs the bite-sized nature of these stories. Yeah, I don't have, I can't, you can't keep my interest long enough to write a 10-page piece on some of these people. So yeah, short answer, editing, editing, editing.
Mm-hmm. Eileen Wallace asked, what is the most recent story you included? And my follow-up to that would be, do you watch the news or do you watch current events and like scribble down like, this is for the next book? Like, I can't believe this happened in history.
That's a great question. I think probably in this book, probably up to about 2014 or 15, maybe later. I cannot remember the most recent year or event. They say that, history needs about 25 years to percolate, before you can properly synthesize and analyze. But yes, as I'm reading the news, there are some things you go, oh my God, this doesn't need much synthesis. This has to go in. I mean, this is too good to be true. And yeah, I do follow. I mean, I carefully follow the news, and I just don't get bogged down in it. But yeah, there's modern presidents are represented of both parties, and sure, there's post 2000 in there, quite a few in both of the Bad Days books. But remember, we're also talking about how many years of human history. You got to keep talking. You mentioned Julia about balance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you've got even a millennium worth of history, there's great stories throughout time, and it really is a very difficult task to winnow them down to one a day. And more Bad Days in history, and hopefully maybe there'll be a third one. I have no idea. I certainly have enough material.
More than enough. Pedro asked a very specific question. In your research, what has been the worst day in high school of any notable person that you have uncovered? Or maybe we could broaden that to any notable people when they were younger. Did they have really bad days in history?
Wow. Experiencing bad days versus causing them. Actually, the only ones that are coming to is well, the death penalty. The Puritans in Massachusetts decreed the death penalty for obnoxious teens, and I think maybe some people might applaud that once in a while when they've had it. I don't have any. I'm sure there are stories about difficult high school years or difficult childhoods. Here's my honest assessment of my recall. I have very little. I love history. I love writing history, but when I've written it, it's kind of gone. So that would be one of those questions I'd love to have emailed to me, and I will have an answer about the some episodes of teenage angst throughout history.
If anyone out there is a screenwriter, great idea. Go ahead and start writing a sci-fi novel in which teenagers from today are transported back and have to fight against strict Puritan laws. I would pay to read or see that. Here's a question from Karen, who asks, which of the characters did you feel most deserved their bad day? And which characters did you most empathize with?
Wow, that's another great question. Oh, by the way, just getting back to that last question, it dawns on me that it's in the first book of Bad Days, not the sequel, but these horrific terror teens that Mao unleashed on the Chinese during the Cultural Revolution. And they're not angst-ridden, they're causing a lot of it. It's just one episode. It just popped into my brain. Excuse me, deserves what they got. I would say J. Edgar Hoover would qualify as from his reputation as the stellar ultimate G-man to this rather depraved, truthfully depraved intrusive monster. That is the portrait of him now, and probably the bad days that explore what he was up to. And I do not, by the way, use anything as cliched as the dress story. I don't. There's no. If anybody gets the reference that this was this big revelation about J. Edgar Hoover, he was a cross dresser. And the idea of it's like I was discussing earlier. Wow, that's hysterical. I wonder if it's true. It's not. By most accounts, it's not. So this isn't me discussing like Hoover getting a bad day, getting busted in his red cocktail dress. But I think what he did to America, and the stories about him that have come out since, are what he's getting. I mean, this Mafia story I read to you. It's just one of the episodes where he's got egg on his face. Awesome.
Did you find that there were moments in history where you're like, well, everyone knows that, I'm going to stay far away from that? Or did you find yourself thinking, well, here's like a significant historic event. I wonder if there are smaller bad days that are happening around communism or around a war. That's sort of a big blow up in history. Did you sort of use those threads?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the things that was when National Geographic first approached me about doing these books, the idea was none of these bad days ought to be the obvious. None of these, communism is horrible, or World War II was terrible, or the Civil War, or the assassination, or the sinking of the Titanic. Events that everybody's very familiar with. They wanted, and what I think you'll see a lot of as you read through, are adjacent events. With the sinking of the Titanic, for example, not the day the Titanic sunk, the day that the parents of the dead band members got a bill from the company for the uniform. It's those kind of things that you just go, no, you're right. They were right. Absolutely. From the get-go. Don't use the obvious.
Ooh, yeah.
I said it.
I'm shocked. Regina asks, what was one story that you would have liked to have remain in the book, but that was maybe removed by your editors? Any of those?
Imagine that probably the best thing to do right now is that since they were removed and I acquiesced to their removal, is probably leave them alone. Yeah, I think so, at least for right now. There were some stories that I tend to walk on a little bit of a different path of what I think is funny and what I think is appropriate. But as I'm getting like with all my old contemporaries, and we're beginning to feel like maybe the younger people are seeing us as antiquated in terms of what we get, and so it's arguable I didn't get the reasons that these should probably not have been in the book. I don't get it now, but there you have it.
That's a really good point, that especially with history or anything involving leaders or these great moments in the world, that like finding the line between humor and what like might be viewed as appropriate in the moment is a really fine one to walk. Do you have like sort of a self-editing system for you, or do you sort of just like, I'm going to go with what I think is funny and then the editors can tell me?
It's never a matter of I'll just throw whatever's out there. No, I'm self-edited, and I've always been very comfortable what I produce. But that's what editors are for. So when I'm told that this doesn't work, and I have the reasons explained, I don't have any choice really but to go, okay, I'm not going to go to the mat on this too much, because maybe you're right. The thing that I appreciate from the editors is that I was asked to replace certain bad days that were controversial, which I didn't like doing, and I still love the ones that aren't in there. but I was never asked to modify or um, rewrite history that was more palatable. So, and I think that's a fine distinction. So anything that's in there is not a result of my being forced into um, taking a historical approach that I don't agree with. The stories that are in this are stories that are true and accurate. It's only that I acquiesced here and there to removing stories that were deemed not right for this kind of book, for this time and this era. I think there are a lot more sensitivities now. And maybe I am a giant beast from the past who just doesn't quite get why they don't work. But it's done, and here they are, and the stories that are in this book, I'm very proud of.
Yeah, it's a humorous, really hysterical book. And we had discussed at the top of the hour, these are bad days in history, not horrendous days or horrible days. One question about the book and who would want to pick it up off the shelf. Why is this a really good book for our current moment? Why do we need this book now?
Well, there's something that says early in the introduction or on the early page, just when you thought it was safe to wallow in your own misery again. I know that we're celebrating the end of, a very trying year. But you know what? Life is trying, and life is fun, and life is joyful, and life can be kind of crappy. And so there's no right or wrong time. Write about the more dismal side of life. It's not that this book has been timed to be released as we emerge like locusts from our COVID nightmare. It's just coming out when it is. So, and it's always fun to read history, the lighter side of history. Even if you're not particularly history, or you're not a history nut, you might, if you enjoy a good story about names that are largely familiar or that might become familiar to you, it has a wide appeal, I think.
I would agree. Trish and Joan want to know, what is your favorite worst day in history? Or a particular person or event that stands out the most for you? It's very hard amongst all of them.
It really is. The one I read is probably my favorite, the Mafia Summit. I don't know. I mean, the Tate Gallery buying this artist's poop stuffed in a can for millions of dollars to display at the Tate Gallery. And another can, this artist's poop, by the way, sits in the Met. I mean, that's an incredible thing to me. Again, maybe I just don't get art, but I'm telling you right now, millions of dollars spent on a can of bowel movement produced by the artist. Those are the kind of things you just go, okay. And that's a modern story, by the way. That Tate purchased that thing, that can of crap, not too long ago. It's those kind of things. No, I can't say I have which are my very favorites. And it also would sound disingenuous with me for me to say I love them all. I do. I mean, that's why they're in here. So please excuse me if I'm being evasive. I just don't have a really good answer. I think each of them have their different appeals for different moods, for different interests. I mean, you got sports bad days, you've got royal bad days, you've got a whole variety of interests and avenues. The arts, bad day in the arts. So they each have their appeal at a certain time and in a certain place.
I love that notion to, like, now again, my brain is going to a sci-fi place and I'm imagining sort of like an alien species being introduced to us and trying to explain an art museum to us, like, here's what they've decided is artistically important.
Right.
Is hysterical. Like when you really step back and think about it, it is hysterical.
And it's actually fascinating. I mean, what we were willing to tear down architecturally, and what we're now looking to preserve. I mean, the stuff that they built in the 70s in the brutalist style, which for a while people would just go, "This is happening. This is horrible." Now, historic preservation societies want to preserve brutalist architecture. Maybe there's something to it. Nobody saw any value in Victorian architecture when they were all being torn down. Nobody saw any value in Penn Station, that great marble edifice of transportation, when that was ripped down. I guess maybe it just takes time or taste change. I don't know. But not knowing, it makes it joyful. Constantly kind of in awe of what is appealing to people, what's selling in art markets. I mean, beautiful Chippendale furniture is now called brown furniture. A lot of it has diminished value. Will it come back? Who knows? That's the mystery when it comes to art and creativity in general.
Yeah, that is such a fascinating conversation. And again, all the more reason to delve more into history. Mike Curtin asks, do you think that you're a happy person because even if you're having a bad day, there are a whole lot of worse bad days? Do you throw that into perspective for your own life?
Yeah, I think it's very helpful for everybody. I mean, please, you think about what's bugging you, and you just think, oh my God. Maybe it sounds a little bit unsympathetic to all the sadness that I'm hearing about how kids' senior years have been ruined by the COVID, and I get it. I mean, that's an important time, but you also had boys marching off the war before they graduated. Perspective does matter. I think if every piddling thing that's happening to you, is somebody is suffering so much worse, and yes, it makes you happy. You're grateful for what you have and you're able to put it in perspective. I think this book serves a good purpose that way. No matter how bad your day is, open it up. Somebody's having it a lot worse. So even if it's like a kind of an evil Schadenfreude mentality, how good they've got it worse. I don't know. Is it uplifting? Who knows about somebody else having a bad day? But yes, perspective is the key to happiness, or one of the.
Yeah, I'm drawn again to folks during the course of the whole pandemic. There are a lot of statistics of actually looking for not only television or literature, any content that was comforting, but things that were sort of hard to get through as well. It really throws everything into perspective. To our audience out there, we have a little game at the bookstore where if you give us a page number, we like to read a short episodic piece. So if you give me a page number for a bad day in history or a date, I will look it up and maybe I will share with Michael. But one more question from me before we get to wrapping up this excellent conversation. Michael, would you be willing to share with us your most recent bad day personally?
Wow, no, because it doesn't stack up. No, it would be so boring and trivial that I would be so embarrassed to share it with you. But thanks for asking.
Well, we do have someone who wants to know about a bad day in history on November 3rd. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to see what happened.
And I want you to be on
a bad. Okay, I'm reading.
Yeah.
Oh, and but it's short, so I won't drone on and on. So it's for our audience.
You've drone less than I have.
For our audience out there, this is November 3rd in 1908. Michael, do you remember it or?
Of course not. I'm looking it up right now.
All right. So it says, On second thought, part 14, strike three. The tide seems to be running in our favor still, and I do not know how they are going to stop it. That's from a three-time Democratic nominee for president, William Jennings Bryan, just weeks before his third and final election defeat, this time to William Howard Taft on November 3rd, 1908. Having confidently made, quote, the worst prediction of his long career, as Bryan's biographer Michael Kazin called it, the candidate was baffled by his electoral loss. Indeed, in the first post-election edition of his weekly newspaper, The Commoner, Bryan implored his readers, "How did it happen?"
That's a part of a series of bad predictions, bold statements that backfire, and that was, what was it? Was that part 14?
Yeah, part 14.
Yeah, there's probably like 25 of those throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing to trace that throughout history again. It occurs to me that with technology and printing, it used to be that you could make a bad prediction in print, and with travel times or the time that information got to people, there were probably a lot of gaffes and mistakes around people learning what. And then to contrast that to even today with how rapidly we get news and media in our feeds, like someone can spread one false or mistaken thing, and it spreads like wildfire before people have time to say, no, that was a mistake, that's not true, like that's a typo, and we didn't mean to say that.
Wasn't there something the other day that went crazy, that Trump had put on his pants backwards, and I mean, thousands of memes and tweets on that. I understand it's not true. I saw the pictures. I couldn't really tell, but people who knows that it's not. But yeah, that's a perfect example in this time of, things fly around the world so fast, and half of them really aren't true. That's why again, it comes back to this percolation of history, when you really stand back from things and you calm down, and you let the more rational, disinterested mind study it academically. I am not a historian. That's first and foremost. So the benefit I have is that I have the historians. I'm a reporter of history, so I have their work, but I let and their research and all of the things that they've learned and worked on and researched. I just get to synthesize it into story. So that's my gig. It's easy, much easier than being in the dusty files for decades on one episode in the Civil War.
Well, you do it with such an incredible and a unique voice. Before we get to our final question from us here at Politics in Prose, is there anything else you'd like to relay to our really engaging and thoughtful audience out there about this book, which is just so delightful and we should all have on our bedside tables?
The bedside table part is key. You can also say on the back of your toilet. These stories really are bite-sized. And if you're one of those people who want to be informed a little, want to laugh a little, you fall asleep after you've read 2 paragraphs, if you do, you've already read one chapter of this book, one of 366 chapters. So it's a great bedside. Learn a little, fall asleep, and the same with the toilet theme. But the most important thing I want to convey is have fun. Be appalled a little bit, laugh a little bit, do some historical comparisons between now and then, realize how soft we are in so many ways, how far we've come in so many ways, how far we haven't, and just enjoy it. I just think for so many people, history was ruined in school with the pedantic teaching style. I was lucky as a dorky kid. I just liked reading about it. I liked stories. I liked the Book of Lists. I liked the Wildesky books of the People's Almanacs and all those great anecdotal collections. And I don't know how I even got my hands on them initially, but that to me is the kind of history that's worthwhile for a general reader. To have fun, to be awed, and um, to be informed at the end of the day. And again, if nothing else, a springboard towards something that really may interest you on a deeper level.
That is such a wonderful point. I'm so struck by even the notion of how quickly we're turned off of history in school. Imagine giving like a classroom full of elementary schoolers an assignment to go pick a bad day in history and just do a little report on it. Like that seed of inspiration could make them more of a lifelong learner for sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but right, a good the details of a king getting guillotined rather than all the intricacies of the French Revolution. Then you're gonna excuse me. Then you're gonna go, why was he guillotined? Oh my God! It didn't slice all the way through. Oh my God! The names that you read about in association with the execution of Louis XVI, they will resonate one day. Maybe you'll understand a little bit more about the French Revolution from the spriggle of an execution story. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right. So for our bonus question from us here at Politics and Prose, before we wrap up, we always like to know from our authors, besides this wonderful book, which we should all go buy immediately, what's on your bedside table that you're currently reading that you could suggest to our audience? Fiction, nonfiction? What else should we be enticed by?
I don't know if anybody's watching that Serpentine series on Netflix. I'm rereading the original book by Thomas Thompson, which I loved as a younger guy, and now it's reading just as well, better I think than the series. But that's me. It's a great book. Thomas Thompson wrote a number of good books. That was I think he worked for the New York Times. But Serpentine, my nonfiction book right now.
Well, thank you for that. From Politics and Prose, we really want to thank you, Michael Farquhar, and our audience out there for engaging with us this evening. Your patronage and dedication enable us to bring you these types of important talks, and we wouldn't be able to host the events without the book sales to support them. So please follow the link in the chat to purchase your copy of More Bad Days in History, the delightfully dismal day-by-day saga of ignominy, idiocy, and incompetence continues. Or you can visit politics-prose.com. And while you're there,
I'm sorry. I was just going to add that if anybody purchases it through you all, I'll come in and personalize it for them. So that's how good I am. I'm just a wonderful person.
You heard it here first. Get a personalized copy of this book. Yeah, feel free to head over to the link in the chat. You can put your personalization requests in the comments field of your order, and we will pass those along to Michael. Michael, thank you so much for that. And everyone, while you're on our website, feel free to check out our events calendar for the latest and greatest from Politics and Prose. And from our shelves to yours, we hope you're out there staying strong, staying safe, and of course, staying well-read. And well-versed in bad days in history. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Julia. That was really nice. And thanks for carrying the burden of the conversation. My voice is a mess, and I really appreciate your thoughtful questions. It was fun.
No worries. Thanks to our audience out there, and have a great